The airport mix-up Raquel Bennett checked her phone again as she stood in the crowded arrivals terminal at Los Angeles International Airport. Her sister Olivia had sent 3 frantic messages in the past hour, each one more desperate than the previous. The last one made Rachel laugh despite the chaos around her. "Please, Rachel. Mom's entire reputation depends on this. Just hold the sign and drive him to the Peninsula Hotel." Professional smile. "You can do this." Rachel looked down at the crisp white poster board in her hands. The name Mr. Montgomery was written in elegant calligraphy, courtesy of Olivia's expensive design skills. Their mother owned a boutique event planning company that catered to wealthy clients across California. Olivia had recently started managing the client relations side of things, and apparently, this Montgomery person was a potential major account. The problem was simple. Olivia had eaten bad sushi at a business lunch and was currently dealing with the unfortunate consequences. Rachel, who worked as a freelance graphic designer from her small apartment in Silver Lake, had been summoned as the emergency replacement. At 28, Rachel was used to being the backup option. Olivia was the glamorous sister, the one who attended charity galas and networked with millionaires. Rachel preferred coffee shops with good Wi-Fi and spending, Saturday nights working on design projects while watching old movies. She adjusted her denim jacket over her floral dress, suddenly aware of how casual she looked compared to the business travelers surrounding her. A woman in a sharp pantsuit walked past, pulling a leather suitcase that probably cost more than Rachel's monthly rent. An unexpected encounter? "Excuse me? Are you waiting for Montgomery?" Rachel turned to find a man standing beside her, and for a moment, she forgot how to form words. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with light brown hair that looked professionally styled yet somehow casual. He wore dark jeans and a charcoal Henley under a well-fitted jacket. His hazel eyes held a warmth that immediately put her at ease, as Rachel managed to say, holding up the sign. "Mr. Montgomery. I'm Rachel Bennett. I'm here to take you to your hotel." The man studied her for a brief moment, and something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe. But then he smiled and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. Shall we head out?" As they walked toward the parking structure, Rachel tried to remember the details Olivia had texted. Tech entrepreneur. Very successful. Considering hiring their mother's company for a major product launch event, do not mess this up. "How was your flight?" Rachel asked, attempting to channel Olivia's professional charm. "Bumpy over the Rockies, but not terrible," he replied. "Though I have to admit I'm always relieved to land safely. Flying still makes me nervous, even after hundreds of trips." Rachel smiled at his honesty. Most of her mother's clients projected an air of fearlessness about everything. "I understand that completely. I once had a flight where we hit turbulence so bad that a flight attendant actually yelped." "Not reassuring," he laughed. A genuine sound that echoed in the concrete parking structure. That would certainly not inspire confidence. They reached Olivia's car. A sleek silver Audi that looked far more sophisticated than Rachel's aging Honda Civic. She silently thanked her sister for having good taste in vehicles as she unlocked the doors. The drive that changed everything as Rachel merged onto the freeway toward Beverly Hills. Her passenger pulled out his phone and began scrolling through emails. The silence felt awkward, so Rachel turned on the satellite radio, landing on an indie folk station. "I like this song," he said, looking up from his phone. "The Lumineers, right?" "Yes," Rachel said, surprised. "You know them?" "I try to stay current with music. It helps during long coding sessions. Though I have to admit, I expected a luxury car service to play something more generic. Smooth jazz or classical." "This is kind of an emergency situation," Rachel admitted. "My sister usually handles these pickups, but she got food poisoning. I'm the last-minute substitute. Fair warning, I'm a graphic designer, not a professional driver. But I promise I know how to get to the Peninsula Hotel without getting lost." He smiled again, and Rachel noticed small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Honesty. I appreciate that. Most people in business try to pretend everything is perfectly according to plan, even when it obviously isn't. "I've never been great at pretending," Rachel said. It's probably why I work alone on my laptop instead of in my family's business. I can't do the whole networking and small talk thing without feeling like I'm performing in a play. What kind of graphic design do you do? Mostly branding for small businesses and startups. Book covers occasionally. Some illustration work when I can get it. Nothing glamorous, but I love having creative control over my projects. That actually sounds more interesting than most conversations I have, he said. Tell me about your current project. And just like that, they fell into an easy conversation. Rachel talked about the logo redesign she was working on for a local coffee roasting company, explaining her thought process behind color choices and typography. He asked thoughtful questions that showed he actually understood design principles. You seem to know a lot about branding for someone in tech, Rachel observed as they stopped at a red light. I started my company from nothing, he said. When you're building something from scratch, you learn to appreciate good design. A strong visual identity can make or break a product, especially in the early stages. What kind of tech company do you run? There was the briefest pause before he answered. Software development. We create productivity tools for remote teams. Not the most exciting thing to most people, but I find it fulfilling to build something that makes people's work lives easier. It's unexpected connection. They spent the rest of the drive talking about everything from design philosophy to their favorite places in Los Angeles. He had visited the city several times and knew hidden restaurants and coffee shops that even Rachel hadn't discovered. She told him about the art galleries in her neighborhood and the bookstore where she spent too much money every month. You're not what I expected, Rachel said as they approached the hotel. What did you expect? Someone more formal, I guess. Most of my mother's clients talk exclusively about business metrics and profit margins. You actually seem interested in things beyond work. I try to be, he said quietly. It's easy to let work consume everything when you're building a company. But recently, I've been making an effort to remember there's more to life than quarterly reports and investor meetings. There was something vulnerable in his voice that made Rachel glance over at him. For just a moment, he looked less like a successful entrepreneur and more like someone who was lonely despite his achievements. Rachel pulled up to the hotel entrance, where a valet in a crisp uniform immediately approached the car. She felt an unexpected reluctance for the drive to end. Well, Mr. Montgomery, she said, turning to face him. I hope this emergency backup service was acceptable. More than acceptable, he said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. In fact, this has been the most genuine conversation I've had in months. Thank you, Rachel. You're welcome. I hope your stay in Los Angeles is productive. He hesitated, his hand on the door handle. Then he turned back to her. Have dinner with me tonight. Rachel blinked in surprise. I don't think that's appropriate. You're a potential client, and I'm supposed to be representing my mother's company professionally. I'm not asking as a client, he said. I'm asking as someone who just spent 40 minutes having a real conversation with an interesting person, please. Just dinner. Rachel knew she should say no. This was unprofessional and complicated and exactly the kind of impulsive decision that usually led to trouble. But something about the hopeful look in his eyes made her throw caution aside. Okay, she heard herself say. Dinner. His smile was brilliant. 8 o'clock? There's a small Italian place in Santa Monica I've been wanting to try. Very casual, nothing fancy. That sounds perfect. As the valet opened his door, he paused one more time. I'm James, by the way. James Montgomery. But please, just call me James. I'll see you tonight, James. Rachel watched him walk into the hotel, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She had just agreed to have dinner with a man she had driven from the airport. A man who was supposed to be her mother's client. What had she just done? An evening of surprises, Rachel changed outfits 4 times before settling on a simple navy dress and ankle boots. She told herself this wasn't a big deal, just dinner with someone who happened to be passing through Los Angeles. But her hands shook slightly as she applied lipstick. And she couldn't stop checking her reflection in the mirror. The Italian restaurant James had chosen was tucked away on a quiet street in Santa Monica. Far from the trendy spots where her mother's clients usually dined, string lights hung across a small patio, and the scent of garlic and fresh basil drifted through the evening air. Rachel spotted James at a corner table and he stood when he saw her approaching. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out her chair. "Thank you. This place is charming. How did you find it?" "A friend recommended it years ago. I've been meaning to come back ever since." He poured water from a carafe into her glass. "I'm glad I finally have a reason to return." They ordered without looking at prices, which Rachel noticed, but tried not to think about. When the waiter brought wine, James asked her opinion on the selection, treating her like an equal rather than someone he needed to impress. Breaking down walls over plates of homemade pasta and shared bruschetta. Their conversation picked up where it had left off in the car. James told her about growing up in a small town in Oregon, about being the first person in his family to go to college. He described the early days of his company, working 18-hour days in a cramped apartment, living on ramen and determination. "Everyone sees the success now," he said, twirling pasta on his fork. "But they don't see the 3 years where I had $12 in my bank account and was convinced I'd made the biggest mistake of my life." "What kept you going?" Rachel asked. "Stubbornness, mostly. And the belief that I was building something that mattered. When you grow up without much, you either become terrified of risk or you become comfortable with it. I chose the latter." Rachel found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone. About her parents' messy divorce when she was 15. About feeling like she was always competing with Olivia's achievements. About dropping out of a prestigious design program because it felt too corporate and soul-crushing. "My mother still introduces me as her daughter who does graphics on computers," Rachel said with a wry smile. "Like it's a hobby instead of a career." Olivia plans celebrity weddings, which sounds impressive at dinner parties. "I design logos for coffee shops, which sounds quaint. Creating visual identity for small businesses is important work," James said seriously. "Those entrepreneurs are pouring everything into their dreams. Your designs become part of their story. That matters." Rachel felt something warm spread through her chest. Nobody had ever framed her work that way before. The confession they were sharing tiramisu when James set down his fork and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Rachel, I need to tell you something. That sounds ominous. I'm not actually the Montgomery you were supposed to pick up today." Rachel froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "What?" "I am James Montgomery." "That part is true. And I did fly into Los Angeles this afternoon. But I'm not your mother's potential client. I saw you holding that sign with my name on it, and I assumed you were my car service. It wasn't until we were already in the car that I realized you were expecting someone else entirely." Rachel set down her spoon carefully, processing this information. "So when I asked about your tech company and the event planning needs, I answered honestly about my work, but I let you believe I was the person you were waiting for. At first I was confused about the mix-up, but then you started talking so openly about being the emergency backup and working at your laptop in coffee shops. You were so genuine and refreshing that I didn't want the moment to end. I thought I'd explain at the hotel, but then you were so lovely that the words wouldn't come out." "This is insane," Rachel said, but she was smiling despite herself. "Olivia is going to kill me. The actual Mr. Montgomery probably stood at the airport waiting while I drove off with a complete stranger. Actually, James pulled out his phone. I had my assistant check on that. There was another Montgomery on the passenger manifest today. Thomas Montgomery from San Francisco. A car service found him about 20 minutes after we left. Your mother's client wasn't stranded. You checked on that?" I felt terrible about the confusion. But Rachel, I'm not sorry it happened. Today has been the best day I've had in years. Talking with you, being treated like a regular person instead of a walking bank account or a networking opportunity. For the first time in months, I felt like myself. The situation was absurd and unprofessional, and she'd have to explain to Olivia what had happened. But looking at James across the table, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes and the hope in his expression, she couldn't summon any anger. "I should be furious with you," she said. "This is completely ridiculous. Are you furious?" "No," Rachel admitted. "I'm mostly amazed that of all the Montgomerys flying into Los Angeles today, I managed to pick up the one who appreciates small business branding and knows good Italian restaurants." "The universe has excellent timing," James said with a smile. 7 days of magic, they saw each other every day after that. James was supposed to be in Los Angeles for 3 days of meetings, but he kept rescheduling, pushing back flights, making excuses to his team in Seattle. Rachel rearranged her project deadlines and ignored Olivia's concerned phone calls. They explored the city like tourists. James wanted to see the Los Angeles that locals knew, not the Hollywood version. Rachel took him to her favorite taco stand in Boyle Heights, to the vintage shops on Melrose, to the hiking trails in Griffith Park, where you could see the entire city spread out below. One afternoon, they spent 4 hours in Rachel's neighborhood bookstore. James bought a stack of design books and asked thoughtful questions about typography and color theory. Rachel showed him her favorite sections. The poetry corner, where she'd spent countless teenage afternoons hiding from the world. "You light up when you talk about design," James observed as they sat in a coffee shop reviewing her portfolio on her laptop. "Your whole face changes. It's beautiful to watch." "I never felt like my work was important enough to get excited about," Rachel confessed. "Compared to what Olivia does, or what my mother built, designing logos and book covers seems small." "Nothing about creating something meaningful is small," James said firmly. "You're helping people tell their stories visually. That's a gift, Rachel." They talked about their families, their fears, their dreams for the future. James admitted that success had left him isolated, that most people in his life wanted something from him. Rachel shared that she'd always felt like she was disappointing her family by not being more ambitious, more like Olivia. "What if you're not less ambitious?" James asked one evening as they walked along the beach in Venice. "What if you're just ambitious about different things? You want creative fulfillment and authentic work. That's not less valuable than chasing money or status." Rachel had never thought about it that way before. The growing connection on Thursday night. James cooked dinner in his hotel suite. He'd had ingredients delivered and insisted on making his grandmother's recipe for shepherd's pie. Rachel sat on the counter, drinking wine and watching him work with an ease that suggested he actually enjoyed cooking. "My grandmother raised me after my parents died," James explained as he chopped vegetables. "She taught me that cooking for someone is an act of love. It says, I care enough about you to spend time creating something nourishing." "How old were you when they died?" 11. Car accident. "My grandmother was 72 and suddenly had a grieving kid to raise on a postal worker's pension. She never complained once. Just rolled up her sleeves and figured it out." She sounds amazing. She passed away 5 years ago, right when my company was starting to take off. I wish she could have seen what I built. She always believed I could do anything." Rachel saw the grief flash across his face and reached out to squeeze his hand. He held on for a moment, then smiled and returned to cooking. Over dinner, James asked about Rachel's dreams. Not the practical career goals, but the secret wishes she rarely shared. "I want to illustrate a children's book," Rachel admitted. "Something beautiful and meaningful that kids could treasure, but it feels like such a long shot." "There are thousands of talented illustrators out there, so create your own book," James said simply. "Write the story yourself and illustrate it." Self-publishing has made it possible for artists to share their work without waiting for permission from publishers. "You make it sound so simple." Not simple, but possible. The biggest barrier is usually our own fear, not the actual obstacles. Facing reality by Saturday, they both knew their bubble of stolen time was about to burst. James's assistant had been sending increasingly urgent messages about meetings he couldn't postpone any longer. Rachel had deadlines looming and a sister who was demanding explanations about what had happened with the Montgomery pickup. They were sitting in Rachel's apartment, which James had declared perfectly Rachel, with its walls full of art prints and shelves overflowing with design books. Rain drummed against the windows while they shared takeout Thai food on her thrift store couch. "I'm supposed to fly back to Seattle tomorrow morning," James said quietly, setting down his chopsticks. "I've put it off as long as I can." "I know," Rachel said, even though hearing the words out loud made her chest ache. "Come with me." She looked at him in shock. "What, come to Seattle?" "Or let me stay here. Or we'll figure out something in between." "Rachel, I know this is fast and possibly crazy, but this week with you has been the realest thing in my life. You make me remember who I am beyond the company and the money and the expectations." "James, we barely know each other. We met by accident a week ago. This whole thing started with mistaken identity. I know the timeline is insane, but I also know that I'm falling in love with you, and I think you might be falling in love with me too. Rachel's heart raced. She wanted to dismiss his words as romantic fantasy, the kind of thing that happened in movies but not in real life. But looking into his eyes, seeing the hope and vulnerability there, she couldn't deny what she felt. "This is crazy," she whispered. "The best things usually are," James said softly. The morning after, Rachel didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying James's words. "Come with me." 3 simple words that represented a choice that could change everything. At dawn, she made coffee and sat by her window, watching the neighborhood wake up. The elderly man across the street walking his terrier, the jogger who passed by every morning at 6:15, the familiar rhythm of her life in Los Angeles, safe and predictable, and hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not really." "You?" "Not a chance." "Can I come over? I want to see you before I have to head to the airport." 20 minutes later, James arrived with pastries from the French bakery down the street. They sat on her small balcony, drinking coffee and not talking about the elephant in the room. Finally, Rachel couldn't avoid it anymore. "I can't just drop my life and move to Seattle," she said. "I have clients depending on me. A lease on this apartment. My family is here, messy as they are." "I know," James said. "I'm not asking you to abandon everything. I'm asking if you think what we have is worth exploring, even if it's complicated and inconvenient." "What do we actually have, though? A week of playing tourist and pretending the real world doesn't exist? We have connection, understanding, the feeling of being truly seen by another person." "How often does that happen, Rachel? How many people go their entire lives without finding someone who makes them feel the way we make each other feel?" A sister's wisdom. After James left for the airport, Rachel finally returned Olivia's increasingly frantic calls. Her sister arrived 30 minutes later, still in her pajamas, demanding the full story. Rachel told her everything. The mix-up at the airport, the dinners and long conversations, James's confession about not being their mother's client, and finally, his request for her to come to Seattle. Olivia listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Rachel finished, her sister was quiet for a long moment. "Do you love him?" Olivia finally asked. "I barely know him. It's not what I asked." Rachel thought about the past week. The way James listened when she talked about her work, really listened, asking questions that showed he understood. The vulnerability he'd shown when talking about his grandmother. The way he made her feel like her dreams mattered, like she mattered, exactly as she was. "Yes," Rachel admitted. "I think I do." "Then what are you afraid of?" "Everything. What if it doesn't work? What if I append my entire life for someone I met a week ago and it falls apart? What if I'm making a huge mistake?" Olivia reached across the table and squeezed Rachel's hand. "You know what I envy about you? You've always been brave enough to choose yourself. When that design program was making you miserable, you left, even though Mom was furious. When you decided to freelance instead of getting a safe corporate job, you did it, even though everyone said you were crazy. You've always trusted your instincts. This feels different, because the stakes are higher. But Rachel, I've watched you play it safe with relationships your entire adult life. You date nice guys who don't challenge you, who don't really see you. Then you wonder why you're not happy. This James person, whoever he is, he sees you. I can tell just from the way you talk about him. What if I fail? What if you succeed? What if this crazy, impossible thing turns out to be exactly what you've been waiting for?" The choice. Rachel spent the afternoon walking through her neighborhood, saying silent goodbyes to familiar places. The coffee shop where she'd spent countless hours working on her laptop. The park where she ran every Sunday morning. The art supply store where she knew all the employees by name. This was her life. Small and safe, and entirely under her control. No big risks, no dramatic changes, no possibility of spectacular failure. But also, she realized, no possibility of spectacular success. No room for the kind of magic that had filled the past week. She thought about what James had said about barriers. being mostly fear rather than actual obstacles. What was actually stopping her from trying? She could freelance from anywhere with an internet connection. Her apartment lease was month to month, and if things didn't work out with James, she could always come back. Los Angeles wasn't going anywhere. The real question wasn't whether she could go. It was whether she was brave enough to try. Rachel pulled out her phone and called James before she could talk herself out of it. He answered on the first ring. "I've been staring at my phone for 3 hours," he said. "Tell me you're calling with good news." "I need to finish up some projects first," Rachel said, her heart pounding. "And I need to give my landlord notice. And I need to tell my mother, which is going to be a nightmare. But James, I want to try. I want to see where this goes." The silence on the other end lasted so long that Rachel thought the call had dropped. Then she heard James's voice, thick with emotion. "Are you serious?" Completely terrified, but yes, "I'm serious. I don't know if this will work. I don't know if we're making a huge mistake. But I know that I've never felt this way about anyone, and I'd regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't at least try. When can you come? Give me 2 weeks to wrap everything up here. Can you wait 2 weeks?" "Rachel, I'd wait forever." New beginnings 3 weeks later. Rachel stood in the arrival section of Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, watching for James in the crowd. Her entire life was packed into 4 suitcases and 12 boxes that had been shipped ahead. She'd had tearful goodbyes with Olivia, a surprisingly supportive conversation with her mother, and a going-away party at her favorite coffee shop where her regular clients had promised to continue working with her remotely. Then she saw him. James, pushing through the crowd with a huge smile on his face and flowers in his hand. He pulled her into his arms, and Rachel felt something inside her relax. This was right. Terrifying and uncertain, and completely right. "Welcome home," James whispered against her hair. "This is crazy," Rachel said, but she was smiling. "The best things usually are. Come on, I want to show you your new studio. I found this amazing space with huge windows and perfect light. It's all set up for you? You rented me a studio? I wanted you to have space that was entirely yours, so you never feel like you gave up your independence to be here with me." Yes. They walked toward baggage claim. James talked about the apartment he'd found for her, separate from his place because he wanted her to have her own space while they figured things out. He talked about the design community in Seattle, the coffee shops she'd love, the hiking trails they could explore together. Rachel listened and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope, excitement, the thrill of possibility. 6 months later, Rachel sat in her studio, putting the finishing touches on the illustrations for her children's book. The story was about a girl who took a chance on an adventure and discovered she was braver than she'd ever imagined. The main character looked suspiciously like Rachel herself. Outside her window, Seattle spread out in the late afternoon light. She'd fallen in love with the city almost as quickly as she'd fallen in love with James. The rain didn't bother her. The coffee culture suited her perfectly, and the design community had welcomed her with open arms. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Dinner at our place?" "I'm cooking. Our place." After 3 months of maintaining separate apartments, they decided to move in together last month. It still felt new and exciting, waking up next to him every morning. Building a life together from scratch, Rachel saved her work and started packing up for the day. As she looked around her studio, filled with her art and her projects and the evidence of her thriving freelance career, she thought about the choice she'd made 6 months ago at LAX. Everyone had thought she was crazy. Taking a chance on someone she barely knew, moving to a new city, pending her entire life for a relationship that started with a case of mistaken identity. But standing here now, living a life that felt authentic and joyful and completely hers. Rachel knew she'd made exactly the right choice. Sometimes the best things in life come from accidents. Sometimes taking a risk leads to something more beautiful than you could have imagined. And sometimes the person you were never supposed to meet turns out to be exactly who you needed all along.